Welcome to the deep dive. For you listening right now, our mission today is to explore a really groundbreaking new paper by researcher Boris Krieger. And it asks a deeply unsettling
It
question.
really is. Unsettling is the right word.
Yeah, because it asks, what if the Star of Bethlehem wasn't just, a miraculous light or like a metaphor, some simple alignment of planets? What if it was actually a cometary nucleus, 50 kilometers wide, traveling at 42 kilometers per second and passing within a literal hair's breadth of Earth?
Which is just, it's hard to even picture that scale.
Right. We are looking at this radical cross-domain theory today, one that reframes the most famous star in history as a literal near-extinction event, an event humanity barely survived, and one that basically birthed an entire global religion from the literal trauma of near annihilation. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, it is a profound shift in perspective.
Yeah.
And to understand how a hypothesis like this is even formulated, we kind of have to look at the foundational problem of how history has been studied for, well, the last 4 centuries.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So, since Johannes Kepler first proposed his Jupiter-Saturn conjunction theory way back in 1614, the Star of Bethlehem has been trapped in completely isolated disciplinary silos.
Right, the silos. I always pictured this like a massive team of people, right? And they're all looking at a giant mosaic on the floor, but every single person is looking through a microscope.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah, so the astronomers are ever in their corner, right? And they are rigorously calculating planetary orbits and massings and retrograde motions. And then the theologians and biblical scholars are in like another room entirely,
Like completely separated.
deeply parsing the original Greek text of the Gospel of Matthew, arguing over the nuance of very specific verbs.
And then, you have the sinologists in their own department,
Mm.
and they're translating ancient Chinese imperial astronomical records, while the Roman historians are off trying to reconstruct the exact political chronology of King Herod's paranoid final years in Judea.
Right, exactly. And because everyone is looking through their respective microscopes, they describe their individual mosaic tiles with absolute perfect accuracy. But they completely miss the picture of the giant comet rushing right at them. Nobody is looking at the whole board.
Nobody at all. And that's exactly what the methodology in Krieger's paper changes. It uses what is called an AI-driven, undirected, multidisciplinary sweep, or UMS.
Right. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the UMS method, it is essentially a way to tear down those academic walls. You point an artificial intelligence at a very specific window of time, in this case, the years 7 to 4 BCE.
Right, at that crucial window.
But instead of asking the AI to, find the Star of Bethlehem, which would introduce immediate confirmation bias, you just tell it to collect everything happening in the world during those 3 years across all accessible disciplines.
Exactly. You feed it planetary defense science, sinology, Babylonian cuneiform studies, biblical philology, just all at once.
Right.
It creates this unified evidential field without any prior hypothesis.
And when you establish that unified field, an anomaly pops out, right?
It pops out immediately. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't come from Judea or Rome. It comes from the sinological domain.
Right.
Specifically, an imperial court astronomy record found in a text called the Han Shu.
The Han Shu.
Yeah, which is the official history of the former Han dynasty. What's fascinating here is the sheer observational rigor of the Chinese court astronomers during this era. They were arguably the most meticulous sky watchers of the ancient world.
Yeah, the Imperial Astronomical Bureau, the Taishiling, right? They weren't just a group of hobbyists looking up on a clear night. It was a permanent, highly funded state institution.
Exactly. They had complex armillary spheres, precise water clocks. Their mandate was to monitor the sky constantly.
Because in their political framework, the sky actually dictated the mandate of the emperor. Like any anomaly in the heavens was a direct commentary on the government's performance on Earth, so they had to get it right.
Right, they observed the sky with real bureaucratic rigor. And in the Han Shu, specifically in the Treatise on Astronomy, there is a very detailed entry dated to the 2nd month of the 2nd year of the Jianping reign.
Okay, so what does that translate to for us?
When we map that onto our modern calendar, it corresponds to around March or April of 5 BCE.
Which is huge.
It's massive.
Look up.
It places us right in the critical window for the birth of Jesus, assuming King Herod died in 4 BCE, which, remains the standard historical consensus.
Right. And what exactly does this record document?
It documents the appearance of an object they classified as a huijing.
A huiying. Okay, let's get into the philology of that term, because the exact Chinese characters used here matter immensely for the physics of what we're going to discuss.
They really do. The precision of classical Chinese astronomical terminology is critical. The character hui literally depicts a broom.
Of
Yeah. It's composed of radicals that represent bamboo, a hand, and fire. So a huixing is literally a broom star or a sweeping star. This is their standard, unambiguous, classical term for a tailed comet.
It's a great visual, honestly, for anyone looking up at the night sky. The tail of a comet really does look like a celestial broom sweeping across the darkness.
It really does, and it is entirely distinct from another category they used, which was quasing.
Which means guest star, right?
Exactly. A guest star was their classification for a nova, or a supernova, basically a point of light that suddenly appears, stays fixed in one spot, and has no tail.
Got it. So by explicitly using the term huixing, the Chinese observers are telling us definitively that this object in 5 BCE was a physical comet with a visible tail. It was not an exploding star.
Absolutely not an exploding star. And the record also gives us specific motion and duration data. It says the broom star emerged in the asterism known as Chen-Yu, which is located in the northern part of what we call the constellation Capricornus.
Okay. And the verb used in the text is chu, right? Which means emerged from or appeared from.
Yes. It implies that the comet started its visible journey in Capricornus, but it wasn't stationary. And as for its duration, the text states it was visible for Kishi-Yuri, which means 70-odd days.
70-odd days. So we have a bright, naked-eye comet with a tail visible for over 2 months.
Right. But we have to look at the political context of this specific comet to understand why it was recorded so carefully.
Okay, let's look at that.
The Han Shu includes a traditional commentary on why this 5 BCE comet mattered. Because the asterism Qinyu wasn't just any patch in sky. In the Chinese cosmological framework, it was considered the cosmological origin point.
Wait, the origin point, like ground zero for the sky.
Exactly. It was the theoretical place where the sun, moon, and planets were thought to begin their celestial cycle.
Oh, wow. So for a comet to suddenly appear in the absolute 0 point of their cosmological map, that has to be the ultimate omen.
It was. The commentary literally uses the idiom, out with the old, in with the new. A comet at the origin point signaled the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. It meant major dynastic change.
And people actually acted on this.
Oh yeah, this wasn't just an abstract fear. A few months after the comet appeared, a prominent Chinese court official actually used this specific celestial event to petition Emperor Ai to change his reign title and institute massive political reforms.
That's incredible. So the comet was a highly consequential event in China, completely independent of anything happening on the other side of the world in Judea.
Completely independent.
Now, I can hear a skeptical listener thinking, we are basing a massive history-rewriting planetary extinction theory on a single sentence compiled by a historian named Ban Gu almost a century after the actual event. Isn't that a remarkably slender thread to hang all of this on?
The skepticism is completely valid, sure. But when we examine the baseline reliability of these Chinese imperial records, that thread is incredibly strong. Bangu was compiling the Han Shu directly from the state archives of the Taishi Ling.
And we know they were accurate.
Very. We can verify their accuracy because these same archives track Halley's Comet in 12 BCE.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They recorded Halley's path across multiple constellations over 56 days with such precision that modern astronomers actually use that exact data to calibrate our current models of Halley's orbit today.
That is wild.
They were also the ones who successfully recorded the supernova of 185 CE. They weren't inventing phenomena for political clout, They were observing physical reality.
Okay, so that establishes a really firm baseline. A physical object, a comet with a tail, was definitely in the sky in the spring of 5 BCE, and it was significant enough to cause political shockwaves in China. But this brings us to a massive physical paradox when we cross over to the biblical text.
Right, the paradox.
Because if a comet was there, moving across the sky for 70 days, how does that possibly match the description in the Gospel of Matthew? I mean, Matthew 2.9 famously says the star went before the wise men, guiding them south from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and then it came and stood over where the young child was.
Exactly. This is the exact paradox that has broken every astronomical theory for 400 years.
Because celestial objects simply do not behave that way. The Earth is rotating west to east, which means everything in the sky, stars, planets, comets, the sun, the moon, rises in the east and sets in the west. They do not guide you south down a dirt road for 10 kilometers and then hit the brakes, hover over a specific building, and stand still.
No, they don't.
That violates basic orbital
It
mechanics.
violates everything we understand about celestial mechanics,
They know.
unless you factor in a concept proposed in 2025 by NASA planetary scientist Mark Matney.
Okay.
In his orbital reconstruction of this Chinese comet, he introduced a concept called temporary geosynchronous motion.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially for those of you who love physics. Let's break down exactly how temporary geosynchronous motion works, because it literally transforms a biblical miracle into a terrifying optical illusion.
It does. To understand this, picture the Earth spinning on its axis, right? For an object in space to appear completely stationary in the sky to an observer standing on the ground, the object's movement across the celestial sphere has to perfectly counteract the rotation of the Earth beneath it.
Right. I like to compare this to driving on a multi-lane highway. If you are in the middle lane going exactly 70 miles per hour, and you pass a car in the right lane that is going 69 miles per hour, that other car appears to be standing almost completely still relative to your window.
Exactly.
Even though both of you are hurtling forward at terrifying speeds, the relative motion between the two vehicles just cancels out.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the geometry. Now we scale that up to a comet and a rotating planet. A comet falling into the inner solar system from deep space is moving at roughly 42.1 kilometers per second.
Which is mind-numbing.
Yeah, that is the standard velocity of an object on a near parabolic orbit at a distance of 1 astronomical unit from the sun. So, for a comet moving at 42 kilometers a second to achieve this optical illusion of standing still in the sky for a couple of hours, it cannot be millions of miles away.
No. The geometry demands that it has to be incredibly close to the Earth. How close are we talking in Matney's reconstruction?
Frighteningly close.
Yeah.
Matney's calculations demonstrate that the comet's transverse angular velocity, which is its side-to-side movement across the sky from our perspective, would only match Earth's rotation if the comet passed between 0.5 and 2.3 lunar distances from Earth.
Wow. Okay, a lunar distance is the distance from the Earth to the Moon, which is roughly 384,000 kilometers. You were saying this comet passed roughly between half the distance to the Moon and twice the distance to the Moon.
Yes.
In the vast scale of the solar system, that is an absolute graze. That is a bullet parting your hair.
It is a near-collision trajectory. The comet is coming almost straight at the Earth. Because of that head-on approach, its side-to-side motion across the sky is very small. During a brief window of a couple of hours around its closest approach, that tiny side-to-side motion perfectly matches the angular velocity of the Earth spinning.
Let's paint the picture for the listener. What does this exact visual look like for the Magi, the wise men, on the ground in Judea?
According to the orbital reconstruction, we are looking at June 8, 5 BCE. And interestingly, this event happens in daylight.
Daylight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The comet is so incredibly close to Earth that its coma is reflecting massive amounts of sunlight. It rivals the full moon in brightness. It is entirely visible in the daytime sky. So the Magi leave Jerusalem and head south toward Bethlehem. Because of the specific geometry of the comet's flyby and the Earth's rotation, the comet appears to be moving southward, pacing them as they walk.
Okay.
Then as it hits its closest approach, the relative velocities lock. The comet appears to stop and stand completely still directly overhead for about 2 hours.
It literally stands over the town, exactly as the text describes. That is wild. It perfectly maps to Matthew 2.9, not as a supernatural suspension of the laws of physics, but as an optical illusion created by a near-miss flyby.
Right. It is the first astronomical candidate in history that actually satisfies the phenomenological description in the text without resorting to magic.
The alignment between the physics of temporary geosynchronous motion and the ancient text is remarkable, but we have to ask about the origins of this object. Was this an interstellar object like Oumuamua that just passed through our solar system once, or was it an Oort cloud comet?
That's a great question. If it was interstellar, it came from outside the solar system, moving incredibly fast on a hyperbolic trajectory.
But the paper notes that the Chinese saw it for over 70 days. For an interstellar object to be visible to the naked eye for that long before flying past Earth, it would have to be moving relatively slowly for an interstellar object and approaching us from a highly specific angle, right?
Exactly. It's theoretically possible. But if it was interstellar, it took one pass at Earth and is gone into deep space forever. But statistically, an Oort cloud origin is far more probable.
Okay, the Oort cloud.
Yeah, which is a spherical shell of icy debris at the outermost edges of our solar system. If it came from there, it is a long-period comet gravitationally bound to our sun. It has an orbital period. The math shows that from the single data point in the Chinese record, we can't calculate exactly what that period is. It could be a 500-year orbit or a 10,000-year orbit.
Because the difference in velocity between a comet that returns in a few centuries and one that takes a million years is just a few meters per second at 1 AU.
Right, it's a tiny difference.
Which means it could come back. I mean, it might have already come back without us realizing it, or it might be out there right now, slowly turning around in the deep freeze of the Oort cloud, getting ready to fall back toward the inner solar system.
Which is a terrifying thought.
Yeah, because achieving this optical illusion requires the comet to be so close that it represents an existential threat to the biosphere. Which brings us to the core of the paper's hypothesis, the near-extinction event.
Right. If we look at Matney's specific June 8th orbital solution, it places the closest approach at about 0.00026 astronomical units.
What is that in terms we can visualize?
That translates to basically exactly one single lunar distance.
Just one.
Oh.
Okay, let's talk about the physical reality of a cometary nucleus hitting the Earth at 42 kilometers per second. What are we actually dealing with in terms of sheer destructive power?
We're dealing with an object estimated to be anywhere from 10 to 50 kilometers in diameter. Let's assume the high end of 50 kilometers. Striking the Earth at 42 kilometers per second, the kinetic energy release would be on the order of 10 to the 28th, or even 10 to the 30th joules.
For context, the Chicxulub impactor that wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago was estimated to be roughly 10 to 15 kilometers wide. A 50-kilometer comet is Chicxulub scale on an entirely different magnitude.
Oh, absolutely. It is an absolute biosphere killer. If the trajectory had been fractionally different, the impact would have occurred around 8:00 a.m. local time over the latitude of Judea. It would have punched a transient crater roughly 340 kilometers wide into the Earth's crust.
Wow. And if it hit the Mediterranean Sea, which is highly probable given the rotation and latitude?
It would have displaced the entire water column down to the seafloor instantly.
Instantly. The resulting mega tsunamis would be unimaginable. You are talking about walls of water 100 to 300 meters high, propagating outward at jetliner speeds. Those waves would have obliterated every coastal civilization in the basin. Rome, Alexandria, Athens, Carthage, gone within hours.
Gone. And the water is just the secondary effect. The initial impact would blast millions of tons of vaporized rock and water into the upper atmosphere and low Earth orbit. As that ejecta rained back down, the friction would superheat the atmosphere. The sky would literally burn, radiating intense thermal pulses down to the surface, igniting global firestorms.
Just a global oven.
Within days, the soot from the fires, combined with the atmospheric dust, would block out the sun entirely.
An impact winter. Photosynthesis would collapse. The entire global food chain would disintegrate. I mean, the human population in 5 BCE, which is estimated to be around 200 or 300 million people, would be reduced to a few scattered, isolated groups clinging to life in deep caves or remote highlands.
Yeah, there would be no Roman Empire, no Han Dynasty, no Christianity. Modern civilization as we know it would not exist.
The margin of survival may have been considerably less than one lunar distance. We only know it missed because we are here to analyze the historical records. But the fact that the solid nucleus missed the Earth's surface doesn't mean the Earth entirely missed the comet.
No, not at all. Because comets aren't just solid rocks hurtling through space. They're complex structures. You have the nucleus, but when it gets close to the sun, the ice sublimates, creating the coma.
Right, the coma.
Which is a massive diffuse envelope of dust, gas, and fragmented rocky debris that can be larger than the planet Jupiter. And then you have the tails.
And the tail of a comet always points away from the sun, right?
Right.
Because the dust and ionized gases are being blown outward by the solar wind and radiation pressure.
Exactly. So let's track the specific geometry of this flyby. Before June 8th, the comet is rushing toward Earth from the outer solar system. The sun is behind the Earth, relatively speaking, so the comet's tail is streaming behind the comet, away from us.
Okay, tracking.
But after the closest approach on June 8th, the comet flies past Earth and moves into the space between the Earth and the sun. Because the tail must always point away from the sun, the tail essentially flips direction relative to our perspective. It is now pointing directly back at the Earth.
Oh, wow. And the Earth, moving in its own orbit, flies directly into it.
Exactly. The Earth passes right through the comet's tail and the outer edges of the coma. This brings us to one of the most famous and widely depicted scenes in the entire Bible.
The shepherds in the fields from the Gospel of Luke.
Right. Picture the shepherds on the night of June 8th. A few hours ago, during the day, the massive, terrifying comet stood directly overhead. Now the sun has set. the Earth plows into the cometary debris field.
And what does that look like?
We were talking about dust, gravel, and small boulders hitting the upper atmosphere at 42 kilometers per second. The sky would erupt into an apocalyptic meteor storm.
Now, if you've ever seen a meteor shower, you might see one or two shooting stars a minute. A meteor storm is entirely different.
Oh, yeah. Completely different.
In 1833, the Leonid meteor storm produced an estimated 100,000 meteors an hour. I mean, people thought the world was ending. Passing through a fresh cometary coma at this proximity would produce a storm magnitudes more intense than the 1833 Leonids. Thousands of bright bolides, massive fireballs streaking across the sky every single minute.
And because of the orbital geometry, those meteors would appear to streak out of a radiant point in the constellation Capricornus, which happens to be exactly the direction of Bethlehem as seen from Jerusalem.
Yep.
Yeah. The text in Luke chapter 2 says, "The glory of the Lord shone around them, and suddenly there was a multitude of the heavenly host."
Well, yeah. For a first-century shepherd with absolutely no vocabulary for atmospheric entry physics or cometary dust trails, an intense sky-filling meteor storm lighting up the night with brilliant streaks of fire is perfectly described as a multitude of the heavenly host.
Wait, so you're telling me Matthew and Luke aren't two conflicting stories drafted by competing theological camps? They are just two different timestamps of the exact same 24-hour physical event.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, yes, absolutely. Matthew is documenting the daytime closest approach of the cometary nucleus, the standing star. Luke is documenting the nighttime passage through the debris field, the meteor storm. There are two phenomenological trauma reports of a near-extinction flyby.
That is just chilling. When an ancient civilization experiences the sky bursting into fire, and they narrowly survive an event that could have ended the world, they don't sit down and write equations for orbital mechanics. They use the most powerful vocabulary they possess. The vocabulary of prophecy, deliverance, and salvation.
Right. And dropping a near-extinction visual into the sky is terrifying anywhere. But dropping that visual into Judea in 5 BCE is like throwing a lit match into a room full of gunpowder. The political and cultural tinderbox of the region was already primed to explode.
It really was.
Yeah.
We're dealing with King Herod the Great, a ruler whose paranoia and cruelty cannot be overstated.
Oh, yeah. Herod's final years were a masterclass in political terror. He wasn't just a tough king, he was a dying, terrified tyrant, systematically eliminating anyone who might represent a rival claim to his throne.
In 7 BCE, just 2 years prior to the comet, he had his own 2 sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, executed for treason. He executed 300 military officers who supported them. He fined 6,000 Pharisees who refused to swear an oath of allegiance to him and the Roman Emperor Augustus. He was constantly changing his will, constantly executing family members.
And into this environment of extreme oppression and terror drops a profound prophetic expectation. The Jewish people weren't passively suffering, they were actively searching the scriptures for a deliverer. The source material highlights the Dead Sea Scrolls here, specifically a text that shows what they were expecting to see.
Right. The scrolls known as 4Q175, or the Testimonia, is a document compiled in the early 1st century BCE and it gathered together key messianic proof texts.
And what was the main one?
The most prominent one is from the book of Numbers, chapter 24, verse 17. "A star shall come forth out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel."
So the expectation of a savior, a new king who would break the oppression of Rome and Herod, was explicitly linked to a celestial sign, a star. The framework was already built and waiting for a trigger. But the people who first recognized the sequence of signs leading up to the comet weren't the locals in Judea, they were the Magi.
Exactly. The Greek word used in Matthew is magoi. Originally, this term referred to Zoroastrian priests from Persia, but by the Hellenistic period, it had broadened to include the highly sophisticated Babylonian astrologer priests.
Right.
And we have concrete physical evidence of their observational capabilities.
Uh-huh.
There is a cuneiform tablet in the British Museum, BM 35429, known as the Star Almanac of Sippar. It dates precisely to this era, around 7 BCE. On this tablet, Babylonian astronomers predicted a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation Pisces.
Wait, they predicted it? They didn't just observe it happening.
They predicted it months in advance using complex mathematical models.
That is just staggering. And in Babylonian astrotheology, this specific planetary alignment was, well, deafening, right?
Oh, extremely loud. Jupiter represented the supreme god and kingship. Saturn was associated with the western lands, specifically the region of the Levant and Judea. Pisces was associated with wisdom, the end of cycles, and a new era. So a rare triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Pisces was essentially a massive neon sign in the sky, broadcasting. A divine king is about to be born in the west, in Judea.
So the Magi didn't just see a comet one day and decide to take a road trip. The UMS method reveals this was a multi-year, multi-stage sequence.
Exactly. Stage 1 is the 7 BCE Jupiter-Saturn triple conjunction. It's not visually spectacular to the naked eye, but mathematically and astrologically, it tells the Magi to focus their attention entirely on Judea. Stage 2 happens in February 6 BCE, when Mars joins Jupiter and Saturn in a planetary massing. It reinforces and amplifies the omen.
Okay, I'm following.
Then stage 3 is the appearance of the Chinese Huixing in March 5 BCE, the massive comet. It is the physical dramatic trigger that causes the Magi to finally pack their bags and head west to see the new king.
But the connection between the planet Jupiter and the 5 BCE comet isn't just astrological. The paper details a mechanism called the gravitational lever, and this is where the line between astrophysics and ancient prophecy completely blurs.
It really does blur. The physics of the comet's arrival are staggering when overlaid with the astrological timeline. The comet is falling in from the deep outer solar system. To reach the inner solar system and pass the Earth, it has to cross the orbit of Jupiter.
Right.
Jupiter is the largest planet. It possesses a massive gravity well. It is the dominant gravitational perturber in the solar system. If a comet passes near Jupiter, Jupiter's gravity will alter its trajectory, either pulling it in, speeding it up, or deflecting it.
It's a natural gravity assist, basically bending the comet's path.
Exactly. The orbital mechanics show that the inbound comet crossed Jupiter's orbital distance roughly 8 months before it reached Earth. That places the Jupiter crossing right around October 6 BCE.
And October 6 BCE is precisely 9 months before the June 5 BCE nativity. In Christian theology, that is the exact time frame of the Annunciation, the conception of Jesus.
More profoundly, in October 6 BCE, Jupiter's physical position in space was determined by the orbital dynamics that caused the triple conjunction in 7 BCE.
Wait. Are you saying what I think you're saying?
The very astrological sign that the Magi read as an omen of a king's birth physically placed the massive Jupiter in the exact location necessary to exert a fractional gravitational pull on the incoming comet.
Hold on, so the astrological sign they were reading actually generated the physical gravity that caused the near miss.
Yes. Jupiter's gravity provided the fractional deflection that aimed the comet at Earth, but also ensured it would miss by exactly 1 lunar distance. The astrological sign literally exerted the gravitational force that caused the near miss.
That completely dismantles the boundary between cold Newtonian physics and miraculous intervention. So what does this all mean for the listener? Does realizing that the Annunciation aligns perfectly with Jupiter's gravitational pull on a comet reduce this whole story to pure, unfeeling physics? Or does it make the historical coincidence even more mathematically mind-blowing?
Well, the UMS method doesn't adjudicate between physics and miracles. It simply maps the intersection. When the world narrowly avoids extinction and a child is born in that exact window of deliverance, the survivors use the most powerful language they possess to make sense of the trauma and the survival.
They call him the savior.
Exactly. The Greek title, Soter. In the Hellenistic world, Soter was not originally an abstract spiritual concept concerning the afterlife.
Right, it was a concrete political and physical title. It was bestowed upon a leader who delivered a city from a military siege or saved a population from physical annihilation. Like Ptolemy III of Egypt was called Soter because he saved Rhodes from a siege.
Right. The world almost ended in fire. A child was born under the star that almost killed them, and the pre-existing prophecy of Numbers 24 maps that physical survival onto the child. He was the savior because the world was physically saved.
That reframing of the origin of Christianity is incredibly compelling, but it immediately raises a massive historical red flag. If this was truly an event of this magnitude, a physical near miss that lit up the daytime sky, filled the night with a meteor storm, and birthed a savior narrative, why is there absolute silence from Rome? No Roman historian mentions it. No Greek astronomer.
That's a glaring omission.
Even Flavius Josephus, the famous Jewish historian who meticulously documented Herod's reign and actually recorded other comets, says absolutely nothing about a massive daylight comet in 5 BCE. How can an event visible to the entire hemisphere be completely absent from Western records?
It is the loudest silence in the historical record, but it is explainable. The paper identifies this phenomenon as structural blindness. It's not that the Romans couldn't physically see the comet, it's that the structures of their society prevented them from recording it. The UMS method applies a historiographical concept called the compound visibility function.
I feel like this is essentially how modern social media algorithms work. You can have a massive, globally significant event happening, but if the algorithm decides it doesn't fit your engagement profile, or if it violates the platform's content guidelines, it is completely filtered out of your feed.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
You never see it, and a year later, there's no digital record on your timeline that it ever occurred. The Roman Empire had its own cultural and institutional algorithms.
Exactly. The compound visibility function breaks down into 5 specific factors that functioned as a compound suppression filter for Rome. If you were a Roman citizen or historian, the first factor filtering your reality was the interpretive framework. In the Roman world, comets were almost universally interpreted as bad omens. They were portents of plague, military disaster, or the death of a king.
Now, there was an exception for Julius Caesar's comet, the Cetus Iulium in 44 BCE, right? Augustus used that to claim Caesar had become a god.
That was the rare exception, entirely manufactured for propaganda. By 5 BCE, Augustus was heavily promoting the ideology of the Pax Augustana, an era of perfect, divinely ordained peace and stability across the empire.
Right.
In that political climate, nobody in Rome wanted to officially record a terrifying bad omen that directly contradicted the emperor's narrative of peace. It was politically dangerous to acknowledge a sign of impending doom.
But even if it was politically taboo to write it down in an official state history, wouldn't some rogue astronomer in Rome or Alexandria have jotted it down in a personal log? Which brings us to the second factor in the compound visibility function.
Yes. The second factor is institutional absence. Unlike Han Dynasty China, Rome did not have a Taishi Ling.
No dedicated astronomy bureau.
Right, there was no permanent institution whose mandated job was to systematically and objectively record the sky night after night. Roman observations were made incidentally by random scholars, augurs, or priests. If an individual author didn't care to write it down or was too afraid to, the data was simply lost. There was no institutional backup.
And the third factor compounds that problem: observational conditions. The orbital reconstruction shows this comet was primarily a pre-dawn object, rising just before the sun for much of its approach.
Yeah, timing is everything. Unless you were a professional astronomer priest obligated to watch the heliacal risings, like the Magi in Babylon or the Chinese astronomers, you were probably asleep. The average Roman citizen or historian wasn't awake at 3 a.m. looking east.
Makes sense. What's the fourth factor?
The fourth factor is simply the tragedy of ancient history: source loss. We have lost a staggering amount of Roman literature. Of Livy's massive 142-book history of Rome, we only have 35 books left.
Wow, just lost to time.
The official priestly records, the annals, are entirely gone. It's entirely possible that someone in the Roman world did write a detailed account of the comet, but the papyrus or parchment rotted away or was burned centuries ago.
And the final factor?
Astrological illegibility. To the Babylonians, the 7 BCE conjunction, the 6 BCE massing, and the 5 BCE comet formed a highly legible, coherent story about a king in Judea. But the Romans used a different astrological framework. To a Roman observer, these were just random, unconnected events in the sky. Without the Babylonian cipher, the events meant nothing to them, so they didn't link them together into a recordable narrative.
So when you multiply all 5 of those factors together, political suppression, lack of institutions, poor viewing times, destroyed documents, and astrological mismatch, the visibility of the event in the Roman record basically drops to 0.
Yes.
But there is an argument often raised about the Christians themselves. There is a famous debate about the Testimonium Flavianum. Later Christian scribes who were copying the works of Josephus actually inserted or interpolated fake passages praising Jesus to make it look like Josephus, a Jewish historian, believed Jesus was the Messiah.
Right, the forgery debate.
Yeah, so if medieval Christian scribes were willing to forge historical documents, why didn't they just fake a record of a massive comet in Josephus's writings to definitively prove the Gospel of Matthew was scientifically accurate?
The answer to that reveals another fascinating layer of blindness. The Christian scribes in the Middle Ages couldn't fake an astronomical record because they didn't know the Chinese record existed. The Han Shu wasn't translated into European languages until Jesuit missionaries went to China in the 1700s.
Ah, I see.
A monk in a 12th century European scriptorium had absolutely no idea what year a comet actually appeared, what constellation it was in, or how long it was visible. They lacked the basic data required to forge a convincing astronomical record.
And beyond the lack of data, they had no theological motivation to do so either. The early church fathers, like John Chrysostom and Origen, had spent centuries establishing the theological framework that the Star of Bethlehem was a pure, supernatural miracle.
Right, they doubled down on the magic.
They argued vehemently that it was not a natural comet obeying the laws of physics, because attributing it to nature would diminish the divine magic of the event. So a medieval scribe wouldn't even think to insert a naturalistic comet observation into a history book to prove a miracle. It would have undermined their own theological consensus.
Exactly. However, there is one extremely suspicious detail in the surviving Roman records that points to deliberate erasure: the Cassius Dio lacuna.
Cassius Dio was a Roman historian writing around 220 CE, right? And he actually did record comets when he found them in older sources. Like, he recorded Halley's Comet in 12 BCE in Book 54 of his history.
Yes, but when you look at the surviving manuscripts of Cassius Dio today, Book 55, which is the specific book that would have covered the exact years from 5 BCE to 2 BCE, has a massive physical chunk missing.
Just a hole in the book.
It's a lacuna, a physical hole in the history book corresponding exactly to the years of the nativity in the comet.
That timing is incredibly suspicious. Cassius Dio was writing during a period of intense intellectual and political conflict between the traditional pagan establishment and the rapidly growing Christian movement.
It is entirely plausible that an early pagan editor or scribe, realizing that Dio had accurately recorded a massive comet in 5 BCE that inadvertently validated the Christian birth narrative, simply tore those pages out of the manuscript to deny Christians the historical proof. We can't prove it definitively, but the location of the lacuna is highly suggestive.
So the Romans filtered it out through cultural algorithms, the Christians spiritualized it into a miracle, and the physical records were either lost to time or deliberately destroyed. But the memory of a near-extinction event isn't easily erased from human consciousness.
It isn't. It survived, but it mutated. The paper suggests it got encoded into the most terrifying, psychedelic, and misunderstood book of the Bible, the Book of Revelation.
Okay, let's talk about Revelation.
When we connect the physics of a cometary near miss to the theology of apocalyptic literature, we hit a linguistic and typological parallel that is stunning. In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 2, the Star of Bethlehem is described using the Greek word aster. It is a star that guides the Magi and then stands over the earth. It is an incredibly close encounter, but it doesn't hit. It's a flyby.
Now contrast that with the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 8, verses 10 and 11, the author describes a catastrophic event during the end of the world. He writes, "A great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter." The exact same Greek word used for the Star of Bethlehem, aster, is used for wormwood.
Right. Matthew's aster stands over the earth and saves it. Revelation's aster falls to the earth and poisons it. One is a flyby, the other is an impact. And the physical description of wormwood is not magical or purely metaphorical. It is a highly precise phenomenological description of a cometary strike. Burning like a torch is exactly what a massive cometary bolide looks like as it undergoes atmospheric entry and ablates in the sky.
But the detail that always puzzled me was the water turning bitter. Why would a rock falling from space poison the rivers and lakes?
Because comets are not just inert rocks. They're often described as dirty snowballs, filled with highly complex primordial chemistry.
Like what?
Well, modern space probes have confirmed this. The European Space Agency's Rosetta mission, which orbited and landed on Comet 67P, detected massive amounts of complex organic molecules in the cometary coma, including high levels of hydrogen cyanide, formaldehyde, and methanol.
So if a cometary nucleus impacted the Earth, or even if it exploded as a massive airburst over a watershed, it would dump thousands of tons of hydrogen cyanide into the regional water supply. And hydrogen cyanide literally turns water toxic and gives it a highly distinct, bitter, acrid taste. The literal translation of the Greek word absinthos wormwood is bitterness. It's a perfect chemical match for a cometary impact.
This brings us to a terrifying hypothesis regarding planetary defense. Are Matthew's star and Revelation's star just two different poetic metaphors utilized by different authors, or are they describing the exact same physical object?
In planetary defense science, there is a recognized mathematical pattern for cometary impacts. When a long-period comet from the Oort cloud passes very close to Earth, like within 1 lunar distance, as Matney's model suggests for the 5 BCE event, the Earth's gravity perturbs the comet's orbit, it alters the trajectory slightly. So the comet survives the flyby and goes back out into deep space, but when it returns on its next orbit centuries or millennia later, its path is different. Over multiple orbits, these gravitational perturbations accumulate.
Exactly. A comet that narrowly misses Earth on pass 1 has a mathematically non-zero and often increasing probability of impacting Earth on a subsequent pass. The canonical example of this in our solar system is Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. It passed incredibly close to Jupiter, was gravitationally perturbed and broken apart by tidal forces, and then returned on its next orbit and slammed directly into Jupiter in 1994. The near miss sets up the future impact.
So what does this all mean? The author of Revelation might not have been receiving a mystical, supernatural vision of the future. He might have been applying the harsh, empirical logic of survivors.
The paper posits that ancient apocalyptic literature is actually compressed empirical memory. Pre-scientific cultures were deeply observant. They maintained thousands of years of generational memory. They observed a cyclical pattern. A bright comet appears in the sky, and weeks later, Earth passes through its debris trail. Meteor storms happen. Sometimes fragmented bolides cause massive airbursts that burn forests or destroy cities. Crops fail due to the dust. They learned empirically that comets bring disaster.
When the 5 BCE comet nearly wiped out humanity, dominated the sky, and then flew away, the survivors deduced the most logical, terrifying conclusion. It missed us this time, but it's on an orbit. It is bound to the sun. It will be back, and next time, it might not miss.
Yes, Revelation might essentially be the generational PTSD of our ancestors, encoded as religious prophecy, warning us across millennia about a specific returning cometary body. They couldn't leave us orbital elements or mathematical models, so they left us a terrifying mythological warning about wormwood.
If ancient apocalyptic texts are essentially encoded warnings of orbital mechanics, how do we differentiate between spiritual metaphor and literal physical reality? Is there any way to test this hypothesis? To prove that the 5 BCE flyby wasn't just a story, but a physical event that left a mark on the planet?
This raises an important question. And the beauty of the UMS method is that it doesn't just generate historical theories. It generates testable scientific predictions. If the Earth truly passed through the coma and tail of a massive comet in June of 5 BCE, that event would leave a permanent chemical signature on the Earth itself. Specifically, we would find that signature trapped in the polar ice caps.
The Greenland ice cores?
Yes. Researchers have formally contacted the National Science Foundation Ice Core facility in Denver, which houses the GISP-2 ice core from Greenland. The GISP-2 core was drilled miles down into the ice sheet, and it possesses precise annual layer resolution going back tens of thousands of years. You can literally count the years like tree rings.
That's amazing.
The prediction is highly specific. If you locate the exact layer of ice laid down in 5 BCE and subject to mass spectrometry, you should find a massive anomalous spike in extraterrestrial markers.
What kind of markers are they looking for?
You would look for an anomaly of iridium and platinum. These elements are incredibly rare in the Earth's crust, but they are highly concentrated in cometary and meteoritic material. You would also look for a massive ammonium spike, which is produced when massive amounts of meteoric material burn up in the upper atmosphere, altering the atmospheric chemistry before settling into the ice. And most importantly, you would look for cosmic spherules.
Right. Cosmic spherules are tiny, microscopic droplets of melted iron and silica. They form when meteoroids enter the atmosphere, melt from the intense friction, and then rapidly cool into perfect tiny spheres as they fall to Earth. If those specific markers are found concentrated in the 5 BCE ice layer, it physically proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Earth had a massive close encounter with a comet at the exact moment in history that Jesus was born.
The investigation isn't limited to geology either. The researchers have also contacted the Oxyrhynchus Papyri project at Oxford University. There are roughly 500,000 fragments of ancient papyri recovered from a garbage dump in Roman Egypt, and only a tiny fraction of them have been translated and cataloged.
So they're digging through the trash to find the record.
Exactly. They are actively utilizing digital scanning and natural language processing to search those uncatalogued fragments for the Greek or Germanic words for comet, star, or fire in the sky, dated to this exact window, trying to find the lost Greco-Egyptian observational record of the event. This isn't just a historical thought experiment. It's an active, ongoing scientific investigation across multiple continents and disciplines.
We have covered an unbelievable amount of ground today. We started with a single, meticulous sentence in a Chinese imperial chronicle about a broom star in 5 BCE. We used modern orbital mechanics to show how that specific comet could perfectly mimic the standing Star of Bethlehem through the physics of temporary geosynchronous motion. We saw how that same flyby brought a 50-kilometer nucleus within 1 lunar distance, threatening humanity with a Chicxulub-scale extinction event.
We tracked how the Earth's passage through its tail ignited a terrifying meteor storm that terrified shepherds described as the heavenly host. We explored how the gravitational pull of Jupiter, aligning perfectly with the Babylonian prophecy, deflected the comet just enough to save us, physically birthing the concept of the savior. We exposed the structural blindness and political algorithms of Rome that erased the event from Western history, and finally we looked at how the trauma of that near miss was encoded into the apocalyptic warning of wormwood in the Book of Revelation, leaving us a warning in the ice cores of Greenland.
It proves that when we finally tear down the academic walls between planetary science, ancient history, and theology, we realize our ancestors weren't just making up fairy tales or inventing myths out of nothing. They were desperately trying to document the exact same physical reality we are studying today. They just had to use a different vocabulary to do it. Which leaves me with one final provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up.
It's a thought that really forces you to look at our modern world differently.
We've spent the last hour looking at how a near-extinction event from space was culturally encoded by ancient survivors as a miraculous birth and an apocalyptic prophecy. Think about the global existential threats we face today. We are dealing with climate tipping points, the rapid, unpredictable evolution of artificial intelligence, the constant looming threat of nuclear near misses. In 2,000 years, long after our digital data servers have decayed, our hard drives have corrupted, and our scientific records have been lost to our own modern structural blindness, what mythological monsters will our descendants invent to describe the catastrophes we are barely surviving right now? Will runaway AI be remembered as a demon of silicon that consumed human minds? Will the catastrophic effects of climate change be codified as a vengeful ocean god punishing us for our hubris?
It really makes you wonder what our own era's Book of Revelation will look like when it's written by the survivors.
Like we said at the very beginning, we are trained to think of extinction events as distant geological history. But sometimes they are just the day the sky caught fire, and we simply happen to live long enough to tell a story about it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.